few months ago, I made a video discussing the case of Junko Furuta, which is probably the most gruesome and infamous murder in Japan's history. But there's actually another infamous Japanese murder that I've known about for much longer than Junko's murder. In fact, I remember seeing it all the time on the news back when I was around 14 years old. The story of the 22-year-old British English teacher working abroad in Japan, who was brutally murdered by a man who'd hired her to teach him English, and the 2-year manhunt for him that followed. This is the story of Tatsuya Ichihashi and his murder of Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay Hawker was born in Coventry, England to Julia and Bill Hawker on December 30th, 1984. She was the middle of 3 daughters, alongside her sisters, Louise and Lisa. Lindsay had a happy and privileged childhood, attending the private King Henry VIII school, where she was popular with students and teachers. Her former headmaster, George Fisher, remembered her as someone who, quote, always put the needs of others before herself. When she was older, Lindsay volunteered at the local primary school, helping disabled children learn to swim. In her spare time, she loved to read and would spend hours in the bath, reading a book from cover to cover. In 2003, Lindsay started a degree in biology at the University of Leeds, graduating in 2006 with first-class honours. Although she planned to do a master's degree, she wanted to see more of the world first. In October 2006, Lindsay, aged 21, travelled to Tokyo, Japan, planning to stay for a year. She found a house share in the city's suburbs and began a teaching job at the Nova English Language School. She would work there for the next 6 months. Every day, she would go to and from work on her bike, which she would leave at Chiba Station. One day, in March 2007, Lindsay picked up her bike at the station and prepared to cycle home. But this was no ordinary day, as when she was opening the lock on her bike, she was approached by a man claiming to be her student, with him simply saying, "You are my English teacher." However, she did not know the man. She politely tried to excuse herself and began riding away on her bike. The man simply started following her, jogging alongside her as she tried to get away from this awkward situation. No matter how fast she went, the man refused to stop following her, eventually running at full speed to keep up with her. As if he was having a normal conversation with Lindsay, he began asking a series of questions, such as, "Where are you from? How old are you? Why did you come to Tokyo?" Lindsay didn't answer any of his questions, but still he ran after her. He followed her all the way home. When she finally got to her apartment, Lindsay tried to say a polite goodbye once again, but was interrupted by another question. "I wonder if you could give me private English lessons." He offered to pay her generously by the hour for these lessons. As she didn't know him, she denied his request, telling him that she was too busy with her job at the school to make time to give the man private lessons. While the man was clearly disappointed by her response, he seemed to accept her answer. Before he left, however, he asked if he could come inside her apartment for a glass of water, as he was obviously very tired and thirsty after running alongside Lindsay all the way from Chiba Station. At first, Lindsay was hesitant to let the man into her home, as she was obviously unnerved by how he chased after her. However, she had 2 roommates living with her, and knew that it was very unlikely that he'd try anything with other people around. Lindsay allowed the stranger inside, where he once again asked if she considered his offer, this time offering to pay her 3,500 yen an hour. Lindsay, not wanting to turn down extra money, finally agreed and said she would meet him at a coffee shop a few days later. The man was very pleased with her answer and thanked her for her time. Before he left, however, he decided to show his appreciation in a very bizarre way. He pulled out a pen and a piece of paper and began scribbling on it before handing it to Lindsay. He had drawn a rather eerie sketch of her, which no doubt will have only made Lindsay even more uncomfortable. Alongside the sketch, he had written down his phone number and email, as well as his name, Tatsuya Ichihashi. Tatsuya Ichihashi was born in the Gifu Prefecture on the 5th of January 1979. His mother was a dentist, while his father was a medical doctor. He'd originally wanted to continue the family tradition by becoming a doctor like his father, but was unsuccessful into getting into college after failing his exams, and instead pursued a career in horticulture. After graduating from the Department of Horticulture at Chiba University in 2005, Tatsuya did not work and lived on a monthly allowance from his parents of 100,000 yen, which would be around 600 British pounds, or $760 American at the time. Tatsuya had no previous convictions, but he had been the subject of an allegation of theft and injury 6 years before. He had allegedly assaulted a woman on the street during a robbery, but the matter had been settled out of court, with some believing his father had paid the woman 1 million yen to get her to drop the charges against his son. He was known as a loner, with an obsession for physical fitness. He regularly attended a gym and cycled 25 kilometers a day, hence why he was able to keep up with Lindsay on her bike. On March 25, 2007, Lindsay met Tatsuya at a Tokyo cafe for a private English lesson. The two were actually caught on CCTV during this time. Lindsay seemed relatively relaxed, but did make an effort to put some distance between her and Tatsuya whenever he moved towards her. Afterwards, he convinced Lindsay to take the short taxi journey with him to his apartment so that he could pay her, claiming he had forgotten his wallet. Lindsay obviously wanted to get this all over with, as she had work later that day, and didn't plan on staying in Tatsuya's apartment long. When they arrived, Lindsay told the cab driver to wait as she would be right back. However, when she hadn't returned nearly 10 minutes later, he decided to leave. Later that day, the Nova School had noticed that Lindsay had not come to work, which was very surprising as she had never missed a day's work before. More worryingly though, was that she also hadn't returned to her apartment either. This led her roommates to believe that something had happened to her, and they called the police that night to report that she was missing. Lindsay's family, who would speak to her every day online, also began to worry after she went several days without contacting them. On Monday, March 26th, she missed another day of work. Nova contacted her parents to let them know of their daughter's sudden disappearance, before contacting the police soon afterwards. The police began their search at Lindsay's apartment and interviewed her roommates. They told the police that Lindsay had been to a coffee shop before her disappearance, and that the man she'd been to meet there had given her a sketch with his name and contact details on it. With this clue, the police had their first suspect. At 5:30 p.m. that day, officers arrived at Tatsuya's 4th-floor apartment, but no one appeared to be home. Neighbors let the police into their home so that they could see into Tatsuya's apartment. While the lights in the living room were off, they could see that Tatsuya was indeed in there, trying to hide from the police. One thing that puzzled the police was that Tatsuya appeared to have moved his bathtub from the bathroom to the balcony. Believing they may have a hostage situation on their hands, the 2 police officers at the scene called for backup, and 7 more officers soon arrived. The 9 police officers prepared to break into Tatsuya's apartment. Before they could do so, Tatsuya, barefoot and holding a rucksack, opened the door and bolted past the police. They attempted to grab him, snatching his rucksack away in the process, but he was too fast, and the police lost sight of him as he fled the apartment building. He apparently ran so quickly that nobody saw where he went, and Tatsuya seemed to have completely vanished. Failing to catch him, the police instead searched his apartment, and naturally went to investigate the bathtub on the balcony. Inside the bathtub, they found that it had been filled with a mixture of sand and soil. When they inspected closer, however, they saw a human hand sticking out to the surface. When they emptied the bathtub, they found the naked body of Lindsay Hawker. She had been severely beaten before being strangled to death. Her head had also been shaved. Tatsuya had buried her in the bathtub with a decomposing agent to speed up the decomposition of her body, and planted flower seeds on the top of the soil to disguise the bathtub as a flower bed. News of the murder quickly spread, and various motives for Tatsuya's murder of Lindsay were thrown around, with some even believing he killed her and shaved her head so that he could wear her hair as a wig, as the police found several wigs in his home, implying he may have been a crossdresser. By the next day, the police had announced a nationwide manhunt for Tatsuya, with him becoming the most wanted man in the country. They put up wanted posters across Tokyo, and even placed life-size cardboard cutouts of him on the streets. His face was shown on news stations all over the world, with all of the efforts in place to help the public identify him. And with his face constantly on television, Tatsuya should have had nowhere to hide. Yet somehow, he completely vanished. As the weeks and months went by, it seemed less and less likely that he would ever be found. This frustrated Lindsay's parents. On top of the pain of losing their daughter, there was also the anger they felt at how her killer had completely evaded capture and seemingly got away with killing Lindsay. Several months after Lindsay's death, her parents traveled to Japan to raise awareness for the search for Tatsuya.
I appeal to you all to look at this picture. This was my daughter. Remember her face. Remember this face.
How would any father feel if his daughter was murdered? No one knows how we feel, unless you have lost children yourself.
And that is why hasn't he been caught? And what do they think, or where do they think they can look, or what can they do to try and bring this man out, to draw this rat out of his hole, because he must be hiding somewhere.
Over time, Lindsay's parents turned their attention on the Japanese police, publicly criticizing them for not only failing to catch Tatsuya at his home, but also waiting to question important witnesses. During the ongoing media frenzy, Tatsuya was still on the run, traveling throughout almost the whole of Japan to avoid capture. When he wasn't traveling, he would hide in a concrete bunker on Oha Island, a remote, almost uninhabited island near Okinawa. Eventually, in 2008, Tatsuya found himself in Osaka, where, while he would have a job in construction, he would also be homeless, mostly using internet cafes as temporary shelters. He struggled to get by, as most of the money he made would be put towards plastic surgery, which he would get to alter his appearance, thus throwing the police off of his trail. He'd already performed some primitive surgery on himself, cutting off the moles on his face, and even cut off parts of his lower lip to make it thinner, and even altered the shape of his nose by using a needle and thread. In the summer of 2009, the police raised the reward for any information leading to Tatsuya's arrest from 1 million to 10 million yen. They also suspected that Tatsuya had had surgery and released images pointing out the 2 distinct moles on his face to help identify him if he had indeed had plastic surgery. Of course, by this time, Tatsuya had long since removed the moles on his own. A breakthrough in the case would occur on October 24th of that same year, when a plastic surgeon in Nagoya informed the police that he had just performed nose reconstruction surgery on Tatsuya. Tatsuya had agreed to have before and after photos taken. The surgeon gave these photos to the police, who shared them with the news stations across Japan, which of course led to them being shown around the world. By this point, Tatsuya knew the police were closing in on him. He could no longer stay in Osaka, as some of his colleagues had seen the photos of him on the news and recognized him. He planned to leave Osaka and board a ferry to Okinawa and once again go into hiding on Oha Island until the heat had died down. On November 10th, Tatsuya made his way to the Osaka ferry port, intending to make the 3-day journey to Okinawa, where he would once again be able to evade police. However, Tatsuya seemed to have forgotten that he was the most wanted man in Japan, and that the whole world now knew what he looked like and were keeping an eye out for him. And unfortunately for him, this was the day when the law finally caught up with him. Before he could even board a ferry, one of the workers saw his face and recognized him from the news. He informed security that Tatsuya Ichihashi was at the port, and they quickly confronted him. They asked him outright if he was Tatsuya Ichihashi. At this point, he realized that he had nowhere else to run, as there was now no way he'd be able to board a ferry out of Osaka, and if he ran, it would only be a matter of when, not if, the police would finally catch him. Seemingly accepting that this was the end of the road, he confirmed that he was indeed Tatsuya Ichihashi, the man wanted for the murder of Lindsay Hawker. The police were called and he was finally arrested, 2 years after he had gone on the run. At first, he was charged with abandoning a dead body, but he was later also charged with rape and murder. He was held in custody for over 18 months before he finally stood trial on the 4th of July 2011. Obviously, the evidence was against him, as there's no way an innocent man would spend 2 years running from the police. The public called for Tatsuya to be given the death penalty, as his murder of Lindsay Hawker was one of the most well-publicized Japanese crimes of the 21st century up until that point. In his trial, Tatsuya admitted to all of the charges. On July 11th, 2011, he was sentenced to life in prison for Lindsay's murder. Despite both the public and Lindsay's parents calling for him to be executed, the court ruled that this would not be an appropriate sentence, as he had no prior convictions and murderers with only one victim rarely if ever are sentenced to death. They also believed that because he was still fairly young at 32 years old, that he could possibly be rehabilitated. It's worth noting that Tatsuya had actually written and published a book not long before his trial. It was entitled Until I Was Arrested, and in it, he discusses his 2 years as a fugitive, explaining how he evaded capture for so long, and also confesses to the murder of Lindsay Hawker. All of the profits from the book were intended to be paid to Lindsay's family, and it eventually sold over 100,000 copies. Her family refused the royalties from the book, however, as nothing Tatsuya did could change the fact that he murdered their beloved daughter and sister. Tatsuya took advantage of Lindsay's kindness and generosity, tricking her into believing he only wanted to learn English, when in reality, his intentions were what could only be described as evil. He's going to be eligible for parole in 2022, and while I'd like to say there's no chance of him being released, I said the same thing about Eric Smith before, and wouldn't you know it, he was granted parole in October of this year, so it's entirely possible Tatsuya may be getting out of prison next year. Regardless of the outcome, Tatsuya's crime was one of the most highly publicized in the mid-2000s, receiving just as much attention in the UK as it did in Japan. Tatsuya will have to live with what he did for the rest of his life, and Lindsay's family will also be forced to endure the pain of losing her to this sick man.
Lindsay loved Japan, and you have not let her down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's the video, folks. I apologize for taking longer than I really should have done on it. I guess I needed a little me time after releasing 2 long videos last month. I really want to make more of these shorter videos so I'm not going a whole month between uploads. I've already got another one of these videos planned out, but this one will be about a much older crime that took place much closer to home for me. In fact, it's literally just a half-hour drive from where I live, and I've actually been there. Anyway, thank you very much for watching the video, folks, and I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.